How did settlers in the Wild West manage to stay warm in their homes when snowstorms raged outside and their firewood supplies were running low? You've probably heard stories about how frontier pioneers survived in the harsh conditions of the Rocky Mountains or the Great Plains. Their secret was not magical devices or luck, but a deep understanding of the laws of nature. They built their homes so that the earth and stones themselves would work to conserve heat during the long winter months. Watch the video to the end to learn how simple materials turned a modest cabin into a veritable thermos, capable of retaining the energy of a single log for days. To begin with, I will reveal the best-kept secret that completely changes the perception of construction on the frontier of civilization. Many people are accustomed to thinking that the axe was the most important tool in the Wild West. But in fact, the shovel and the ability to work with inert materials were much more important. Pioneers quickly realized that thin wooden walls could not retain heat if the fire went out for even an hour. They looked for ways to preserve the energy provided by the fire inside the building itself. This led to the creation of unique structures where wood was only the frame and mass became the main heat retainer. This approach allowed people to survive in regions where wood was scarce and winters lasted 6 months. The secret lay in the use of massive walls which acted as a battery. Stone and tightly packed earth have high heat capacity, which allows them to cool slowly. When the fire burned in the fireplace, these materials absorbed energy, literally saturating themselves with heat. Even after the last coals had died down, the massive walls continued to release the stored energy into the room. This created a stable microclimate that was not affected by the sudden gusts of icy wind outside the window. People could sleep in the warmth without having to add wood to the fire every 2 hours. It is important to understand that time and resources were at a premium on the frontier. Settlers could not afford to spend the entire daylight hours just gathering firewood. Therefore, they invested their energy in creating thick enclosing structures. The thicker the wall of sod or stone, the longer it maintained a comfortable temperature. This was a long-term survival strategy proven by generations of trappers. It allowed families to feel safe even in the harshest frosts. There was no room for random details or decorative excesses in this philosophy. Every decision was dictated by practicality and the physical properties of the available materials. The settlers observed how rocks behaved in the sun and copied these principles. They understood that heat was a valuable resource that needed to be not only obtained, but also retained. This understanding made their homes true fortresses against the climate. Without such tactics, the colonization of many regions would have been simply impossible. It was this approach that allowed them to survive in conditions where the slightest mistake led to tragedy. People learned to live in harmony with physics, using the Earth's mass to their advantage. Such a hut became a single organism capable of withstanding the elements. Today, it is difficult for us to imagine how much effort it took to create such protection. We would be very interested to hear your opinion on whether you agree that knowledge of physics was more important than modern technology for survival, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new facts. What do you think about this method of construction? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how ordinary mud became the best insulation in American history? For the inhabitants of the Great Plains, this was not a theory, but a matter of survival. In places where there were virtually no trees, it was impossible to build the usual wooden houses. Settlers had to look for a solution right under their feet. On the Great Plains, settlers built houses out of sod bricks. These blocks were cut from a thick layer of earth along with grass roots. This method of construction did not require complex tools or the delivery of materials. Everything they needed was right there next to their future home. These dwellings were often called sod houses and were the benchmark for energy efficiency at the time. Outwardly, they looked unusual and even crude. But inside, these houses were surprisingly warm and protected. People quickly realized their value. The walls in these houses could be up to half a meter thick or more. Sometimes they were even thicker, if strength and time allowed. This mass created incredible insulation from wind and cold. The house literally merged with the ground. The turf, intertwined with grass roots, was a strong and very dense material. The roots bound the blocks together like reinforcement. Over time, the walls became even stronger. They could withstand strong winds and snowfalls. In summer, such a house was cool, even in the most intense heat. The earth did not allow heat to penetrate quickly. In winter, the walls retained the little heat from the small stove. This saved families from the deadly cold. Sod blocks were laid with the grass facing down, creating a dense and stable structure. This method prevented the earth from crumbling. Gradually, the roots intertwined. The wall turned into a single mass. Over time, the house became almost monolithic. The air trapped in the soil structure and between the roots served as an additional insulating layer. This enhanced protection from the cold. But the main advantage was not only density. The main advantage was thermal inertia. Such a wall warmed up very slowly, but it also cooled down over days and sometimes weeks. The temperature inside changed very gradually. Even in the most severe frost, the inner surface of the wall remained warm to the touch. This amazed those who entered such a house for the first time. People could sit by the wall without fear of freezing. This allowed them to save scarce dry manure or rare brushwood. Settlers often coated the walls from the inside with a thin layer of light-colored clay. This made the room visually cleaner and brighter. The whitish surface better reflected the light from lamps in the hearth. The room seemed larger and more comfortable. Clay helped to distribute radiant heat evenly. It also served as an additional layer of insulation. Microscopic pores in the turf were closed. Air stopped circulating inside the walls. There were practically no drafts in such houses, and it was precisely drafts that were the main problem with wooden log houses on the plains. The density of the earth was so high that the winds simply could not penetrate inside. Even during strong storms, it was calm inside. Families lived in silence and relative warmth while a blizzard raged outside. The house muffled the sounds of the wind. This created a feeling of security. For people living on the open plains, this was invaluable. Many modern people consider such houses primitive and dirty. They judge by appearance without delving into the essence. However, from an energy conservation standpoint, these were some of the most advanced structures of their time. Their efficiency is impressive even today. The land beneath their feet was a free and almost endless resource. It provided protection, warmth, and stability. Pioneers valued functionality over appearance. The lives of entire families were at stake. The ability to cut and lay sod correctly was a key skill. It was learned quickly and seriously. A mistake could lead to the collapse of a wall. It was a real craft. It was the art of transforming the landscape into a reliable shelter. The house literally grew out of the ground. It became part of it. That is why such dwellings were so stable. Sod houses required minimal maintenance if the roof was done correctly. The main threat was water. With a good roof, the walls lasted for many years. They did not rot as quickly as wood. Such houses were not afraid of step fires. Fire could not quickly destroy a mass of earth. The mass of the walls protected not only from the cold, but also from hostile raids. This was an additional advantage. Sod became a universal building material, dictated by the nature of the plains. Settlers adapted to the lack of forests. This is how the unique culture of earthen construction arose. It distinguished the Great Plains from other regions. Each sod brick was a contribution to the stable future of the family. A house was not built for just one season. It had to survive dozens of winters. People put all their energy into it. Survival in a sod house required getting used to the smell of earth and high humidity. These conditions were far from comfortable, but such inconveniences paled in comparison to the opportunity to survive. The main thing was not to freeze to death in the first winter. Earthen walls became a symbol of the resilience of American farmers. They believed that their home was part of the earth itself, and that meant it would not let them down. This belief helped them endure the hardships. This experience shows how people can find a way out using only what is at their feet. It proves the power of adaptation and observation. Do you think modern people could live in such a house for at least a week? In the next chapter, you will learn how mountain hunters use stones to cheat the laws of winter. You've probably never heard of this unique secret because it concerns the most hardy inhabitants of the frontier, trappers. These people lived on the edge of human capabilities and chose places that ordinary settlers rarely reached. They often spent the winter in high mountain areas where the wind was merciless and the frost lasted for weeks. In such conditions, a mistaken construction meant certain death. The temperature in the mountains dropped to extreme levels, especially at night. Firewood was scarce, and gathering it in winter was dangerous and difficult. Therefore, trappers could not afford wasteful heating. Their huts were often built with massive stone foundations and huge hearths that immediately caught the eye. But the secret was not in the fire itself, but in how the stone was arranged inside the room. Trappers understood that stone could not only absorb heat, but also retain it for a long time. They used this property consciously and thoughtfully. Every element of the hearth was important. They built fireplaces so large that they took up almost a quarter of the entire living space. To modern people, this seems like a waste of space. But for trappers, it was a matter of survival. This massive stone became the heart of the home, functioning like a giant battery. The stones for construction were selected in a special way and were never chosen at random. Preference was given to dense rocks that retain heat longer. Trappers knew that porous stone cools quickly and cracks. Therefore, they looked for river boulders, basalt, or granite, even if they had to drag them from far away. The hearth was laid out so that the chimney passed through the entire wall, heating it along its entire height. The smoke did not simply escape outside, but gave off heat to the stone on its way. This allowed every joule of energy escaping with the smoke to be used. Even the losses worked to provide heating. While the fire was burning, the stones became so hot that they could not be touched. The heat penetrated deep into the masonry. The stones slowly accumulated energy hour after hour. It was a long but effective process. At night, when the fire died down, this heat began to slowly transfer into the room. The temperature did not drop sharply, but gradually. Even by morning, there was still noticeable warmth inside the hut. This allowed people to sleep without constantly maintaining the fire. Interestingly, such huts often had very low ceilings and small windows. High spaces were considered the enemy of heat. The less air there is, the easier it is to heat it. Trappers learned this rule from their own experience. This was done to reduce the volume of air that needed to be heated. The heat from the stones rose and stagnated under the ceiling. A dense, warm layer formed there. It slowly descended, warming the entire room. Trappers slept on raised platforms to be in the warmest layer of air. Sometimes these were simple wooden platforms or bunks. This arrangement greatly increased sleeping comfort. Even in severe frost, people woke up feeling rested. The stone wall behind the bed acted as an individual heater. It radiated heat all night long. This allowed trappers to recover their strength even after difficult treks through deep snow. The body got the rest it needed for the next day. Sometimes they used a dry masonry method, filling the gaps between the stones with fine sand and ash. This eliminated drafts and cold bridges. Such a wall did not require mortar and was resistant to temperature changes. In addition, it was easy to repair if necessary. This provided additional insulation and prevented heat loss. Over time, such masonry only became denser. The ash and sand compacted under their own weight. The wall became practically monolithic. Such a wall was almost eternal and did not require repair for decades. Stone was not afraid of sparks and heat. This made such houses much more fireproof than wooden huts. For a lone hunter in the mountains, this was of great importance. For a lone trapper, a stone hut was an ideal and reliable dwelling. He could go hunting for the whole day. Returning after dark, he knew that warmth awaited him inside. The house continued to function even without its owner. Sometimes trappers would heat individual stones directly in the fire. Then they would carefully bring them inside before going to bed. This was a way to locally heat the bed or resting place. Such stones were placed at the feet or along the walls. But the stationary stone array always remained the main element. It did not require constant attention. Trappers observed the habits of animals and understood the value of the heat coming from the ground. Stone was the embodiment of this idea. The stone hut became their reliable rear in the struggle with wild nature. It protected them from wind, cold, and loneliness. Inside, they could wait out a storm or illness. It gave them a chance to live until spring and continue their dangerous trade. This experience of survival in the mountains became legendary among later settlers. It was passed down by word of mouth. Many farmers and hunters adopted these techniques. Stone gradually became part of frontier architecture. They adopted the tactic of using stone to protect their homes and farms. Even a small amount of properly laid stone could change the thermal balance of a dwelling. The skill of a mason was as highly valued on the frontier as the ability to shoot accurately. Stone was cold to the touch, but it carried life-saving warmth. Like this if you think such ingenuity is worthy of respect. What if I told you that the warmest homes in the Wild West were underground? Many pioneers began their exploration of new lands by building dugouts, known as dugouts. They literally burrowed into the hillsides, using the natural heat of the planet. At a depth of a couple of meters, the temperature of the Earth remains constant throughout the year, which is a huge advantage. In winter, it is always significantly warmer there than on the surface, even without constant heating. This allowed for enormous savings in firewood during the harshest months. The front wall of such a dwelling was usually built of wood or stone, and the other three were made of earth. The roof was also covered with a thick layer of soil on which grass could even grow. This created the effect of complete airtightness and exceptional thermal insulation. The wind that knocked people off their feet on the plain simply swept over the roof of such a house. Inside, there was silence and comfort that were inaccessible to above-ground structures. A dugout was the cheapest and fastest way to obtain warm housing. Such shelters were often built along riverbanks or in ravines to take advantage of natural elevation differences. The settlers knew that the earth was the best heat accumulator, requiring no expense. Even if there were only a few coals glowing in the hearth, the temperature in the dugout did not drop below zero. This saved the lives of children and the elderly during periods when firewood was completely depleted. For many families, this was temporary housing, but some remained in them for years. The density of the soil reliably protected the inhabitants from any vagaries of the weather. The walls of dugouts were sometimes lined with logs, but more often they were left open if the soil was clayey enough. Over time, the surface was smoothed and became as smooth as stone. It was easy to maintain a stable humidity in such rooms, which was important for storing supplies. Food did not freeze and seeds remained suitable for planting. It was a comprehensive survival system where the house was both a warehouse and a fortress. Pioneers valued dugouts for their simplicity and reliability. However, life underground had its own peculiarities that took some getting used to. The lack of light and constant proximity to the soil created a harsh atmosphere. But in frontier conditions, comfort was secondary to safety. The dugout was a symbol of the modesty and practicality of the first settlers. They did not try to conquer nature, but rather integrated themselves into it. This allowed them to conserve energy for the hard work of developing the wildlands. Underground construction became an important stage in the history of the settlement of the West. Without these simple shelters, many caravans of settlers would simply not have survived their first winter. The experience of building dugouts was passed from one neighbor to another. It was the collective wisdom of people faced with a shortage of resources. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Apache and other tribes of the Southwest used similar principles. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible weather. In the arid Southwest, the Apache and other peoples used a material that perfectly combined earth and sun. They lived in a harsh climate where heat during the day was followed by cold at night. Ordinary light structures did not survive here. Therefore, people sought a solution in nature itself. This material was called adobe, bricks made of unfired clay with added straw. It was made by hand, mixing earth with water and plant fibers. The bricks were molded and left to dry in the open sun. This process did not require complex tools. Adobe buildings were extremely heavy and as a result had incredible thermal inertia. In the desert, the temperature difference between day and night can reach 30 degrees. Lightweight walls could not cope with such fluctuations. Adobe solved this problem naturally. Adobe walls acted as a natural stabilizer, smoothing out sharp temperature fluctuations. They absorbed the heat of the scorching sun during the day. At night, the accumulated heat slowly returned to the interior. This made life much more comfortable. The walls of Pueblo buildings were often more than half a meter thick, and sometimes even thicker. Such walls hardly let any heat or cold through. The temperature inside the houses remained stable. This allowed people to rest and sleep without sudden climate changes. The interior remained cool during the day and relatively warm at night. This was especially important for health. People could shelter from the heat and not freeze after sunset. Such a balance was rare for desert regions. Pioneers arriving in these parts quickly adopted this technology from the locals. European construction methods were not suitable here. Wood was rare and expensive. Clay, on the other hand, was literally underfoot. They built their forts and ranches from the same clay bricks. Adobe turned out to be the most affordable material in the region. It did not require transportation over long distances. Sand and clay could be found in any canyon or dry riverbed. Adobe required time to dry, but the result was worth all the effort. The bricks could not be used immediately. They had to dry completely in the sun. Patience was an important part of the construction process. The walls were covered with a layer of plaster made from the same clay, which created a solid surface. This protected them from rain and wind. The sun literally hardened these houses. Over time, they became strong and stable. In winter, when snow fell in the mountains of the southwest, adobe retained the meager heat of the hearth. Even a small fire had a noticeable effect. The sun's energy accumulated during the day continued to warm the house at night. It was natural passive heating. This system worked without complex mechanisms or fuel. It was created by nature itself in the experience of generations. People simply used its properties correctly. The house became an extension of the environment. Interestingly, the roofs of such houses were also made massive and dense. They consisted of logs, branches, and a thick layer of compacted earth. This added weight and stability to the building. The roof played as important a role as the walls. This design protected against heat in summer and cold in winter. The entire house was transformed into a single heat trap. Energy losses were minimized. Even strong temperature fluctuations outside were hardly felt inside. Settlers could use very little firewood for heating. The walls and roof did most of the work. This saved energy and resources. In desert conditions, this was vital. Adobe was an environmentally friendly and completely recyclable material. This was particularly suitable for nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples. If a house collapsed, it simply returned to the earth. No waste was left behind. With proper care, such buildings could stand for centuries. Many buildings in Santa Fe and other cities have survived to this day. They still remain cool in summer. Their effectiveness has been proven over time. This ancestral heritage has proven its value in the harshest climatic conditions. Pioneers respected adobe for its simplicity and reliability. It did not require complex technology, but it gave great results. Working with clay required patience and knowledge of local soils. Not every soil was suitable for bricks. Settlers learned to select the right proportions of sand and straw. A mistake could lead to cracks. It was a process of adapting to a new environment where old European methods did not work. People had to learn from those who had lived there for centuries. Adobe became a symbol of cultural exchange on the frontier. Through construction, people found a common language. This knowledge helped many families survive difficult times. Adobe houses provided protection, warmth, and stability. They allowed people to settle in their new land. This is how people survived and took root on the frontier of civilization. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of hut construction? Experienced carpenters in the Wild West sometimes used more sophisticated methods than simply laying logs. They built houses with double walls, creating an empty space between them filled with inert material. They used dry earth, sand, or even crushed bark as filler. This significantly increased the overall mass of the structure and its insulating properties. This solution allowed heat to be retained much more efficiently than a conventional log cabin. Air itself is a good insulator, but when the space was filled with sand, the wall acquired enormous heat capacity. It became a real shield that did not let the cold inside. Such houses were especially popular in the northern states, where blizzards could last for weeks. The family could stay inside, almost without feeling the fury of the elements. The massive walls absorbed the sounds of the wind, creating an atmosphere of calm. The settlers valued silence as much as warmth. Building double walls required twice as much material and time, but it was a reasonable price to pay for comfort. People understood that it was better to invest in quality housing once than to suffer from the cold for the rest of their lives. Often, such walls were erected only on the windward side to protect the house from the coldest air currents. It was selective and very practical architecture. Every log and every handful of earth worked for the benefit of the hut's inhabitants. The interior finish of such walls often included a thick coating of a mixture of lime and horsehair. This prevented the filler from spilling out and created an additional barrier to air. The surface became smooth and reflected heat from the fireplace back into the room. These little tricks allowed the temperature to be kept above freezing even with a minimal fire. Settlers passed this knowledge on to their children as an important legacy. Life on the frontier taught them to appreciate every little thing. Interestingly, such structures also protected against forest fires, as the earth inside the walls did not burn. This made the house a safer place in the wilderness. Neighbors often helped each other build these complex huts, understanding the importance of collective survival. The successful experience of one settler quickly became the standard for the entire community. It was the evolution of building skills in real time. People became engineers out of necessity. Such houses still stand today in some abandoned gold mining towns. They look unremarkable, but their design is impressive in its ingenuity. In the next chapter, we will talk about how the location of the house relative to the sun helped them survive. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible weather. Frontier settlers were keen observers and always took the sun's movement into account when choosing a location for their cabin. They carefully monitored how the sun's position changed throughout the year. These observations were accumulated over generations and passed down orally. A mistake in the orientation of a house could make winter unbearable. They tried to position the house so that the main windows faced south. The south wall was considered the most important part of the dwelling. It was through this wall that the house received the maximum amount of heat and light. This solution required almost no expense but had a great effect. It allowed the low winter sun to penetrate deep into the room and warm the floor and walls. The rays of light slowly moved across the room throughout the day. Stone and earth absorbed this heat. By evening, the house was noticeably warmer than in the morning. Sunlight was a free source of energy that the pioneers used as efficiently as possible. In conditions of fuel shortage, this was crucial. Even on a frosty day, direct rays could significantly raise the temperature in the room. People could literally feel the difference on their skin. The floors in such houses were often made of dark stone or tightly packed earth. The choice of material was deliberate and practical. Wood was used less often because it did not retain heat as well. Stone and earth served as natural energy storage. Dark materials absorb solar heat better and retain it longer. During the day, the floor seemed to absorb heat, and in the evening, it began to slowly release it into the air. This created the effect of a warm floor without any mechanisms. This heat rose from below and was evenly distributed throughout the room. This was critically important for people's health. Feet stayed warm even in severe frosts. This was especially beneficial for children and the elderly. Children could play on the floor without risking catching a cold. The house became safer and more comfortable. Settlers intuitively used the principles of solar architecture long before the term existed. They simply did what worked. They tried to make the north side of the house solid and often added utility rooms to it. This wall had almost no windows. It took the brunt of the wind and cold. The living space remained protected. Woodsheds or storage rooms served as an additional buffer, protecting the living area from the icy north winds. Cold air lost its power as it passed through these rooms. Snow accumulating on the north wall also acted as a natural insulator. People understood this well. The settlers did not rush to clear the snow from the walls. They knew that a thick snowdrift retained heat better than bare ground. Nature itself suggested solutions that helped to conserve energy. One only needed to be observant. The terrain played no less a role than the orientation to the cardinal points. Huts were built under the protection of hills or dense forests. This reduced the wind load on the structure. The house retained heat longer. In valleys where cold air accumulated, houses were built on small elevations. Even a gentle slope could change the microclimate. Pioneers knew that a difference of a few meters in height could mean a difference of several degrees in temperature. This experience has been proven over time. Choosing a location was the most important stage in developing a site. A mistake could be costly. Sometimes people moved after realizing they had chosen an unsuitable location. The land itself showed where it was possible to live. Windows on the north side were rare and kept to a minimum. Too much heat escaped through them. Therefore, settlers preferred to do without them. Every opening was considered a potential loss of energy. Light entered the house mainly from the south and east. The morning sun helped to warm the room more quickly after a cold night. This created a pleasant and calm atmosphere. The day began with warmth and light. Every design decision was aimed at conserving energy. The house became part of the landscape, not a foreign element. It seemed to grow out of the ground. It was architecture of common sense and survival. Understanding the cycles of nature allowed the settlers to live in harmony with the frontier. They did not fight the elements directly. Instead, they adapted to their rhythms. This made life more sustainable. The sun was their ally, and the terrain was their protector. The forest sheltered them from the wind, and the hills reflected the cold air currents. This experience shows how important it is to know the characteristics of your land. Knowledge replaced technology. The ability to read the terrain saved as many lives as the ability to hunt. The house was the first line of defense. If it was built correctly, winter became bearable. This is how people survived on the frontier. The roof of a hut was not only protection from the rain, but also an essential element of heat conservation. Settlers knew that heat always rises, and if the roof was thin, all the energy would simply escape into the atmosphere. Therefore, on the frontier, roofs were made multi-layered and massive. First, heavy logs were laid, then a layer of bark or branches, and on top, a thick layer of earth or turf. This design created a powerful thermal dome over the entire living area. The earth on the roof not only insulated the house, but also served as an excellent weight, preventing the roof from being blown off by strong winds. In spring, grass could grow on such a roof, creating an additional layer of protection from the sun. But in winter, it was the thickness of the soil that saved the house from freezing. Often, the total thickness of the roof cake reached half a meter. This allowed the heat to be retained inside the room as effectively as the walls did. The hut turned into a closed system with minimal losses. Inside the room, the ceiling was often lined with fabric or animal skins. This created an additional air layer and reduced convection. Each such addition helped to preserve a few more degrees of heat. People slept on the upper tiers of beds to be closer to the warm ceiling. In frontier conditions, comfort depended on how well the space was distributed. A small hut with a massive roof was much warmer than a huge house with thin ceilings. Sometimes the attic space was filled with dry grass or leaves, which acted as natural insulation. It was a simple and effective way to improve the performance of the house without unnecessary cost. Settlers used whatever was at hand to increase their chances of survival. They understood that the roof was the most vulnerable part of the house in terms of heat loss. Therefore, special attention was paid to its construction in late autumn. Everyone tried to finish before the first heavy snowfalls. A massive roof required a very strong frame and reliable walls. This dictated the overall architecture of the house. Low-slung, sturdy buildings with powerful beams. Such houses looked heavy, but they were incredibly reliable. They could withstand the weight of meter-high snowdrifts, which became an additional layer of insulation in winter. Snow was a free blanket that nature gave to the settlers. People rejoiced at heavy snowfalls as they meant a warmer winter in the hut. Roof construction was the pinnacle of carpentry in the Wild West. The ability to create a watertight and warm vault was highly valued. It was collective knowledge accumulated through years of experimentation. Today, we can only marvel at how effectively these simple materials worked. Each cabin was a monument to human perseverance and engineering ingenuity. The interior space of the hut was designed to minimize the movement of cold air. Often, a small porch or vestibule was built at the entrance to block the icy gusts of wind when the door was opened. This simple solution allowed the heat to be retained inside the main room, even with frequent entry and exit. In snowstorm conditions, the vestibule became a safe zone where snow could be shaken off before entering the living area. This was an important detail that experienced builders never ignored. The hearth was always located in the very center of the house so that the heat would spread evenly in all directions. This allowed all family members to be at an equal distance from the source of energy. The central location of the chimney also helped to warm the interior walls and partitions. The entire interior was built around the fire, which was the heart and soul of the dwelling. In the evenings, the family gathered around the fireplace, which continued to give off the accumulated heat long after sunset. This created an atmosphere of unity and security. The furniture in the huts was often built in and massive, which also added to the thermal inertia. Wooden benches and beds attached to the walls prevented the cold from penetrating the body. The beds were covered with thick layers of woolen blankets and bison skins, which were the best heat insulators of the time. Settlers used multiple layers not only in clothing, but also in the arrangement of sleeping areas. This allowed them to sleep comfortably even when the water in the bucket on the floor froze. The kitchen and living area were often combined so that the heat from cooking could be used for heating. The smell of food and the warmth of the stove filled the house with comfort and life. Women spent most of the day by the fire, maintaining the heat balance in the house. It was a daily task of resource management. Every log was used to its fullest potential for cooking, for heating water, and for warming the hearthstones. Efficiency was a way of life on the frontier. Low doorways and high thresholds also prevented warm air from escaping and cold air from entering through the floor. People had to bend down when entering, but it was a small price to pay for conserving energy. The floor was often covered with homespun rugs or mats made of dry grass to insulate the feet from the cold ground. Every element of the interior had a practical purpose. There was no room in the hut for useless things that did not help survival. The interior decoration was completed by carefully sealing all the gaps between the logs. For this, they used a mixture of clay, straw, and lime, which was regularly renewed. This work was called chinking and ensured there were no drafts. The settlers knew that even a small hole could cool the entire house overnight. Therefore, attention to detail was fanatical. Comfort was created with hands and perseverance. Today, the technologies of the Wild West may seem archaic to us, but they carry fundamental lessons. To modern people, these solutions seem simple and even primitive. However, they were based on observation, experience, and constant experimentation in real conditions. People learned from their mistakes because every winter was a test of survival. The use of mass walls, orientation to the sun, and respect for natural materials are the basis on which modern energy-efficient architecture is built. Thick earthen or stone walls accumulated heat during the day and released it at night. The correct location of the house allowed the sun to be used as a free source of energy. These principles are becoming relevant again today. The pioneers proved that it is possible to live in comfort even with minimal access to fuel. In conditions where firewood was worth its weight in gold, wastefulness was unacceptable. Each house was designed to retain heat for as long as possible. It was a necessary but very effective approach. Their huts were the result of a deep understanding of the environment and physical processes. They knew how the earth behaved, how the air moved, and how the sun warmed the surface. This knowledge was passed on orally and through practice. It was an era when knowledge and experience were more important than money and equipment. The history of frontier settlement is not only about wars and the search for gold, but also about the struggle for warmth and shelter. Most of the time, people thought not about wealth, but about how to survive the winter. The home was the main refuge from the cold, wind, and loneliness. Without reliable housing, survival was impossible. Every preserved dugout or adobe hut reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit. These structures were built under the most difficult conditions. The settlers did not give up in the face of the harsh winter, but looked for ways to adapt and overcome. They used what was literally under their feet. They built their homes to last for centuries, putting their hearts and souls into them. Every layer of earth and every stone was laid with precision. A mistake could cost an entire family their lives. These structures became the foundation for future generations of Americans. We can learn a lot from these people, especially when it comes to the rational use of resources. Today, when resources are once again becoming limited, This experience is particularly valuable. The skills of building with earth and stone are still relevant today. They allow us to create sustainable and durable homes. The principles of thermal inertia work just as effectively as they did 200 years ago. The laws of physics have not changed over time. Simple solutions often prove to be the most reliable and durable. The Wild West has left us a rich legacy of practical wisdom that is worth studying and appreciating. The lives of the pioneers teach us to appreciate simple joys, the warmth of home, the quiet behind thick walls, and the safety of family. In conditions of constant threat, these things were especially valuable. They knew the value of every log and every handful of earth from which their homes were built. Thrift was not a choice, but a necessity. This experience shaped the character of the nation. Strong, independent, and resourceful. People got used to relying only on themselves and their own hands. The frontier cabin was the place where the history of a great country was forged. It was there that future cities and states were born. Every stone and every log holds the memory of those who risked everything for a new life. These houses were a symbol of hope and perseverance. Understanding how the cabins stayed warm with almost no firewood gives us the key to understanding the entire frontier era. This is not a story of poverty, but of wisdom. It is a story of how man harnessed mass and inertia to cheat the cold. The pioneers were not victims of the climate, they were its masters. They adapted to nature rather than fighting it blindly. Their homes stood against all odds. These dwellings kept their inhabitants warm in the darkest times. They were islands of safety in the middle of a wild land. This is a great example of harmony between the human mind and nature, an example that remains relevant today. As we conclude our story, we see that the secrets of the Wild West are much deeper than just gunfights and adventures. It is a complex science of survival, in which architecture played a key role. Every house was the result of calculations and experience. Nothing was done by chance. We hope that this journey into the past has helped you see the lives of the first settlers in a different light. Their resourcefulness continues to inspire us today. In a world of high technology, their simple solutions sound particularly convincing. Sometimes the future begins with a careful look at the past. We conclude our detailed overview of how heat capacity and mass helped settlers in the Wild West survive without huge supplies of firewood. These examples of stone huts, dugouts, and sod houses show us the true price of comfort on the frontier of civilization. Each of these solutions was dictated by necessity and refined by generations of courageous people. Which survival technology did you find most interesting or unusual? Perhaps it was the underground dugouts or the massive adobe walls. Share your thoughts in the comments. We are very interested in your opinion. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new exciting stories about the frontier.